I think we missed the court, didn't we?
Yes, for now.
Been a while.
Yeah, for a couple of days,
We're only in
right?
the States, you know, twice a year. so.
Okay.
We won.
Yep.
All of you people are early. You're really early, because it's actually only 2:00.
Turn around. At the last tour study, we're like, let's change these clocks, and Rich changed that, and it's like,
But forgot
but wait a
about
minute,
that
we're
one.
changing back again in 2
I
weeks.
didn't mean to be that way.
So we
We
only
are
changed
on
one.
the live stream, just
Don't say anything. You
don't say anything you don't want on the internet forever.
Well, last week we came early, and we
Okay.
were sitting like way back there, and so I said to Rich, you know, let's be closer because we get here.
You got your best idea?
I'm not on the camera.
This is two sessions in a row where Joel has been sitting to my left.
What you doing back there?
I always put significance to that. I'm sure you want to sit there, Joe. You're sitting to my left.
He's talking about you and you
What?
can't hear
I
him.
said, you're
I'm
sitting,
sorry, I was
I
saying
said,
hello
you're
to.
sitting
to the
to my
kinfolk.
left. I said,
What
you're
do you
sitting.
say?
He still can't hear you.
It's not funny anymore.
Oh, good. Oh, oh, I'm sorry, I missed that.
He said you're sitting on the left. You should be on the right.
Yeah, the right,
Get
well, all you folks are stuck up the road. Now I'm not gonna miss a word he says.
How's that?
What do you have, hearing aids?
Well, I don't need them
Costco.
except to hear him.
Oh,
So I thought that I
Otherwise,
needed hearing aids. This is a year ago. I said to my doctor, when I was here, and I said, but I have had problems with wax buildup in the past. So he looked again and he went, and in the present. I mean, I could have made a wax figurine out of what he took out of both ears. So then I could hear again. It was remarkable.
That's good news.
That's a good way to have it.
Hmm.
We'll see.
Works.
We'll see how long it lasts.
So did you enjoy last night?
I always enjoy that, yeah, I saw Alvin Stein at the dentist's office this morning.
You
And
drew
I
it?
said, that's what you get for gnawing on the bone.
What a coincidence.
Yeah, you can do all sorts of crazy stuff. No, thank you.
It's got a, when it comes out.
And you're going to the $5 version tomorrow,
Right.
tonight?
What
Yeah, Wednesday. No,
Today's Tuesday.
tomorrow's your big surgery.
I
No,
know.
it's my pre.
Rhea. What are they gonna do? Just fill out forms?
No, they train you.
No,
what you're gonna
it
be
takes
doing.
2 hours.
It actually takes about 30 minutes and then they let you go.
30 minutes.
You've been through it a few times.
I've been through it myself. And they kept me there for.
Well, that's you.
They just like
I don't know
you.
what they have to say.
Cash. Cash.
What time is it?
8:30. I'm not gonna get to the breakfast.
No,
By the way,
by the way.
Doug,
Good to see you.
Doug, the financial plan.
What?
yeah, he wants,
No, I know.
he seemed to
that.
be interested in coming to the breakfast.
Yeah, I
and all that.
needed to.
He said that before.
I know, he
Doesn't
said
come.
that.
How
before.
was
He said
Beckley
that
in West
before.
Virginia?
And I
It's
told him,
fine. It's fine. They're,
he's a nice guy, but
I
he's
think based upon my conversation
Like-
with my,
not reliable.
Like,
Buddy colleagues.
is Renas back yet?
I think
He
this
is
was
back.
a nearly universal
He's back, and I'm
experience that
sure
this
he'll be
year,
fine.
Jews showed up who haven't shown up for a while. Both
Table for
COVID
five.
and
Hmm?
Table
I
for
think
five.
everything going on has
Table for
has the
5.
effect of people wanting to be in each
Yeah, I
other's
get
company.
it, yeah.
Connection.
So in Beckley, what that meant is, I
Still
think
going, I'm
between
sure
the
Mike is going,
services,
and
No, Mike's
45
go.
different individuals were there. Never all at
On
once,
Wednesday morning?
but in Beckley, that's
Yeah.
A lot of
like
people.
50% more than
Friday.
Wow.
you know, in terms of
Friday.
from 30 to 45.
Might
There were
be
8
6.
children,
Uh-huh.
which
That's good.
you know, somebody drove an hour to be there with 3 kids. Then You showing that to me?
3 o'clock.
Oh, very fun. Very fun. Yeah, I'm just waiting a second to see, in all my years here, 21 years ago, when I came here for the first time, I learned that at least Temple Israel, but pretty much Dayton is a just-in-time congregation, which means that often, right when you start, that's when the last person comes in, so.
That's just because you looked at me.
No, Rich came in several minutes after. I
That was my son.
Yeah, just in time.
Outside.
Oh, it's with granddaughters.
And that's because I know that this
Horse in the air.
native Daytonians don't agree with this,
Yeah.
but comparatively speaking, there's no traffic here, and so you can get places in a relatively short period of time.
You don't
It
have
was-
to aim early.
Yeah, it was very different in Chicago, where everything was based upon how long it takes, not how far it is. You
We
know,
used to
and
go to
so
breakfast with them.
Really? At the Breakfast Club?
Yeah.
once upon a time, and see, I told
Here we
you.
go.
You see? It's the way it works.
Like old farms. So we don't have as many parents sitting on the side.
And I'm sitting at the wrong end of the table.
Well.
When I did Torah study, I already sat where Rabbi Sofian,
Good.
but I knew that that would discombobulate all of it. Okay, so we'll start. I'm gonna do a little background, and then I will pass out the materials we're going to look at. And because, as some of you who know me well know, I know as soon as I pass them out, you cannot resist reading. We'll leave them right here. You can all see that they're here, so we'll have them. But let me do some background first. And for some of you, maybe all of you, this will be background that you don't need, and so that it'll go very quick. But perhaps it is something that we need. Because I want to start today going back to June 1967. So as I look around the room, I think we were all, well, maybe not
Barely.
Tina, the rest of us
A lot.
can remember June 1967. I was going into my senior year in high school, and I would love to tell you that I was completely tuned in and paying attention to world events in a serious and detailed way. That would be a lie. It's not true. What I can tell you is that I was at a youth group event, a nifty event, when we got word of the 6-Day War. And I think you'll remember, those of you who are remembering the 6-Day War, that it hit us like a ton of bricks in a positive way. Once people understood what was happening in the 6-Day War, it wasn't unusual in the Jewish community for words like miracle to be tossed around, right? This is miraculous, that not only were we worried that the Shoah was about to happen again prior to the 6-Day War, that the Egyptians would overrun the south of Israel moving north, and the Syrians would overrun the north of Israel moving south, and that the Jordanians would fill in the gap in the middle. And if you remember, what did they say? They said, we're going to push them, the Jews, the Israelis, into the sea, which they meant. Okay, so when it didn't go that way, and some of you will remember the lead up to all of this, when the Straits of, the Straits of Tiran were closed, and the UN withdrew all of its, what they call the blue helmets or the blue hats in that part of the world, withdrew their troops, and it was all the bellicose language, you remember all this. And then Israel preemptively struck the Egyptian army, the Egyptian Air Force. Took out the Egyptian Air Force essentially on the first day. And we then heard about the Golan Heights and what was happening up north. But what was the big thing, what Sylvan Schwartzman used to call, he taught education, I put that word in quotes, the way he taught it at Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati. He used to call it the suckdologer. You know, the thing was when what? when the paratroopers took the old city. And you will remember the famous quote, and I should remember who said this. I seem to remember it was Moti Gur, who was the general in charge of the Air Force, but of the paratroopers, but I don't know it was true. He said, Har habayit biyadenu, that the Temple Mount is in our hands. And this became this rallying cry. Okay. So you remember all that positive feeling. That's what I'm going for. Okay. Well, we now have hindsight from 67 to today. And it's not all that clear that all of those conquests were an unmitigated blessing. If I'm remembering correctly, Ben Gurion understood this then and is quoted with having said this, that the blessing might become a curse. Okay. Now, I am mentioning all of this because it's necessary. I knew my voice would do this. It's necessary background to an organization that you may remember, you may not remember, you may never have heard of. Who's heard of an organization called Gush Emunim? Does that ring a bell with a couple of you? The word Gush means block, like a group, and Emunim are the faithful. So Gush Emunim was officially founded in February of 1974. But its roots are actually June 1967. Because what happened once what people on my side of the political divide, our side of the political divide, I think I can say this for both of us, call the West Bank. But if you're on the other side of the political divide, you refer to it as Judea and Samaria. Yehuda v'Shomron in Hebrew, Judea and Samaria, which are the ancient biblical Jewish homeland. In the time of the Bible, the Jews did not occupy Tel Aviv on the beach. The Philistines occupied what would be today Tel Aviv on the beach. And if you went further north, the Phoenicians, another Greek seafaring people, they occupied places like Tyre and the coastal cities that are in today Lebanon. The Jews, the Israelites, the Hebrews, whatever term you're comfortable with, were on the mountaintop, the spine of the mountain that runs from Hebron to Jerusalem up along there. So now all of a sudden, that's literally what it felt like. 6 days, right? Bang, the Sock Dowager, all of a sudden, the Jews are in control of what was biblical Israel. Now, if you are of a certain religious bent of mind, what do you conclude from that? What are you drawing from these events?
God has fulfilled his promise.
Exactly. That the biblical promise that Moses speaking in God's name gives to the Israelites is Eretz HaMuftachat, the promised land. What is the promise in the promised land? That God is giving this land to you. Right? Just like Pat Boone's lyrics to the theme to Exodus. He wrote those lyrics. I don't think he wrote the music, but he wrote the lyrics. This land is mine, God gave this land, right? Okay. And it was like, here it is. The fulfillment of the prophecy of the promise. So you have Eretz Muftachat, the promised land is in Jewish hand. Okay. There was, let's see if you know this name. We call him Rav Kook, Rav Abraham Kook. Is that Cook in English, but Kook in Hebrew. He was a very important, he was the first chief rabbi of Palestine. And he had an interesting kind of theory. He related really well to non-Orthodox Jews, even to atheistic Jews who were on the kibbutzim, because he understood them to be God's tools, who were obtaining and settling and developing the promised land as all part of God's plan. So he is a very interesting figure, very orthodox in his own, very mystical in his own sort of way, but he had good relations even with kibbutzniks. Hashomer Hatzayir kibbutznik. His son, I always forget how to, Tzvi Yehuda Kook, sort of carries on his father's work, but in a direction I'm not sure his father would have been all that thrilled with. He becomes kind of the intellectual godfather of these people who ultimately have a greater Israel agenda, who they believe that the promised land is promised to them and now it needs to be developed, and he becomes kind of the rabbi to that, his yeshiva. So Gush Emunim is founded mostly by students who studied in his yeshiva. So who are these people? I wrote down some adjectives so I wouldn't forget. The religious Zionist. We're going to need to talk much more about that. That's actually the subject for today. Orthodox, fundamentalist, right-wing, messianic, theocratic, and I would say fanatical. That's who these people are. These people who ultimately said, all this land is ours. God gave it to us. We need to develop it as greater Israel, the greater state of Israel. No giving it back, no deals with anybody. That makes sense to everyone? Questions about that so far? I don't think that this is actually new, but I'm trying to put it together in a way so that we'll be able to see where it leads to. They made essentially two justifications for who they were. One is, we've already said, that the Torah and God wants the Jewish people to live in all of the land of Israel. The Torah and God wants the Jewish people to live in all of the land of Israel.
God gave it.
Yeah, God gave it. Of course, what we have avoided so far is, what is the definition of the land of Israel? Yes?
Is that when we got Sinai also?
Yes.
Okay.
Sinai came from Egypt, but nobody ever said that Sinai was the land of Israel.
Okay.
Okay? From Syria was the Golan Heights. That's a little more difficult because there's a part just south of the Golan Heights, which is in today Jordan, which was once called Gilead, which was considered sort of part of the land of Israel, depending on which biblical verse you look at. There was no problem in giving Sinai back, not from this perspective, this theological perspective, because it was never the land of
It
Israel.
was never coveted, so.
It was never promised.
Yeah.
Okay. The Golan Heights, I'm going to come to this in a second. Okay, there's a little question about that. Gaza, there's a question. To my mind, Gaza was never part of the land of Israel. It was Philistine. I mean, it's where Samson is taken, to in the whole story of Samson, where he ends up tearing down the temple and all the rest of that. But many consider Gaza to be part of the land of Israel. Okay, so some of what's going on today might start to take a little shape once you think of it in these terms. The second justification for wanting the whole land, not just that God gave it to us, was defense. Defense. How wide is Israel at its narrowest point?
6 miles, 7 miles.
About six, a little more than 6. Hi, come on in. Do you still have any chairs?
You can sit behind the desk.
Here's the chair.
Okay.
Oh, you're fine. Thank you.
We certainly would not want to take the media out. That would be terrible. Okay. So at Netanya, and I think some of you have probably been there, between Netanya and what was the old border was about 6 miles. 9 or 10 kilometers. So Israel was stressed, if you will, they could be easily cut in half. The buffer against Syria, this is the whole defensive argument, is the Golan Heights. Israel accepted that early on. I know that our former president recognized the Golan Heights as officially part of Israel a few years ago, but Israel actually annexed it in the 80s. As far as Israel is concerned, the Golan Heights has been part of Israel for decades, up to Kenetra, which is a city just on the other side of where Israel drew the line, which is Syria. When I went in 1971 the first time, I actually went to Kenetra. Because you could go to Kenetra, you could see what happened. During the war, they just fled. I mean, all the tables were still set with all of the dishes. There was, everything was exactly the way they left it 4 years before when I saw it in 1971. Okay, but it was annexed. The Sinai, we know that story, right? It was taken over in the 6-Day War by Israel. It was partially reconquered by the Egyptians in 73 during the Yom Kippur War. It was reconquered by Israel, and the way that war played out, it was returned to Egypt in the deal that was made with Anwar Sadat in 1979. It actually took a while before it was fully returned, but the deal was made in 79. Okay, but there was an argument about defense, and there is still that argument. It happens there was a peace treaty with Egypt, which, given everything that has happened since 1979, it's really remarkable that that peace treaty is held. All right, 45 years. So the defensive argument is a little less serious on that side. It's more, there's a peace treaty with Jordan. That's a little less serious. Syria has been up Tsuris for, for several years now, but there's no treaty there, and the Golan Heights are understood to be a defensive buffer. Okay. So they had a twofold argument. God gave us the land, it's the promised land, we're supposed to live here as Jews, and defense. These people ultimately evolved. Today, you're not going to find a group. You can't go online, find when the next meeting of Gush Emunim is. Officially, it still exists. It's never been disbanded. But you aren't going to find it because it has evolved into political parties. Okay. It has evolved into political parties. What are the goals of those political parties? Establish Jewish settlements in the West Bank and in Gaza Strip and in the Golan Heights to solidify the position that this is all Israel. That's their goal.
The original settlers that moved into the West Bank, wasn't that Gush Emunim?
Yes. If they weren't officially Gush Emunim, they were fellow travelers. The first of these, if I'm remembering right, the first of these settlements, I should know this. No. All right, so the Etzion block, which are right outside of Jerusalem, were Jewish. They were overrun in 48, and they weren't anymore. They were reconquered in 67, but nobody ever really considered them settlements because they had been part of the Jerusalem environment. They had been Jewish. They had been part of the area. The settlements literally are creating new settlements. I thought I wrote down which was the first one, but I am not seeing it. I'll have to wait a second. Yeah, Kidumim Kidumim was the first one. And you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Okay. Just quickly, definitions of the land of Israel, if any of you want to look it up. If you look up Genesis 15, chapter 15, verses 18 through 21, what is the definition of the land of Israel? Essentially, from the Nile to the Euphrates.
Yeah, well, not the Nile, the Wadi of Egypt.
The Wadi of Egypt. So what is the Wadi of Egypt?
Not the Nile.
Some
Much
people
closer.
think it's the Nile. Other people think that it is literally a wadi that's in the Sinai Peninsula. Either way, from this, to make Joel happy, from the Sinai to the Euphrates. Does that make you all feel better now? It's an expansive definition of what is the land of Israel. If you look up in Exodus 23, verse 31, you'll find a slight variation of that. If you look up in Numbers chapter 34, verses 1 through 15, you will find a variation of that again. In Numbers, do you remember what happens when they're about to cross into the land of Israel? And this is in Deuteronomy, I mean, when Moses is about to die, right? And he's giving them a farewell address, but before the farewell address, which is actually 5 addresses, those of you who think that sermons are long, just imagine if on Yom Kippur you heard the whole book of Deuteronomy. The whole book. Okay, but before that happens, remember there are 2.5 tribes, Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh. Manasseh is really a whole tribe, but we call them a half tribe so that there'll be 12. Ephraim and Manasseh, we each say are half tribes, even though Ephraim was the biggest tribe, but we call them, in terms of people, we call them half tribes so we can keep 12 instead of 13. But the 2.5 tribes come to Moses and say, you know, we have a lot of cattle, and over here on this side of the Jordan, it's really good for cattle. We want to stay here. And what does Moses say to them? Your brothers and sisters are going to cross the Jordan to conquer the land of Israel, and you're going to stay here? Which means, what about that here? That here is not the land of Israel, right? And they say, oh no, we'll go, we'll fight, we'll even be the shock troops, we'll be on the ramparts. But once we win the land of Israel, we're coming back and raising our cattle. That's already in Deuteronomy. Joshua has a little different version if you want to check in chapter 1, verses 4. I actually looked them up. I Googled definition of the land of Israel, and about 18 different definitions come up if you look at all the different biblical citations. My point is, I am accepting that the biblical land of Israel runs from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean, east to west. From essentially what is the Lebanese border today to someplace in the Negev, someplace south of Beersheba. But that whole tip of the Negev was not really part of biblical Israel, but part of it, modern Israel. Okay, so even just deciding what is Israel, that's a big issue, but not for these people, because what they know for sure is that Judea and Samaria are part of Israel. They know for sure that Gaza is part of Israel. Okay, all right. The person I want to focus on in a little bit right now, and I just want you to keep this in mind while we read these quotes, is a guy named Bezalel Smotrich. Apart from him sounding like he comes from one of Dickens' novels, you know who he is?
Yeah.
Who is he?
Well, I don't know who he is, but isn't that the name we keep hearing?
You should, if you're paying attention, you'll hear his name a lot.
Yeah.
It's in the cabinet.
So Smotrich, that is apparently a place in Ukraine, and that's where he draws his name. That his family is from there, or he has some ancestor from there. Bezalel is a biblical name, right? You know, this Bezalel is the architect of the tabernacle. Moses tasks Bezalel, not alone, but primarily Bezalel with the building of the tabernacle, with designing and building of the tabernacle. Who is this guy? Bezalel Smotrich was born in 1980. He's exactly our daughter's age. He's about 44. He is a settler. He lives in Kidumim. He is a lawyer. He was educated at Merkaz Harav Kook. All right? That's the son, not the father. He's educated there. He is the leader of what is called the Religious Zionist Party. It would take far too long and it would be way too boring to go through the whole history of how we get to this party. In Israel, parties change names all the time and they evolve and there's mergers and they come out. He was part of Jewish Home. He was part of something called Yamina, which means rightward. He becomes the leader of the Religious Zionist Party. They're in the Knesset. And as part of the coalition agreement, he is the Minister of Finance. If that was not bad enough, he is also a minister in the defense industry. Ministry. Did I say industry? Defense ministry. It's weird. What does that mean to be a minister in the defense ministry and not be the minister of defense? He's not the minister of defense. I would call him the troublemaker in the Ministry of Defense. Just so that you get a feel for this. In the United States, which cabinet post is the most important cabinet post?
Secretary of
Secretary of
State.
Secretary of State.
I would say Secretary of State. We all agree? In Israel, what is the most important cabinet post?
Defense.
Secretary of Defense. More important than would be the equivalent of Secretary of State. Indeed, I'll bet you couldn't even tell me who the Secretary of State is in Israel.
Wait, is it called, what is it called? What is
It's
it?
called Sarah Chutz, the Minister of the Outside,
The foreign minister.
the Foreign Minister. Okay? His name is Israel Katz. And there's no reason you should know it, because Netanyahu conducts all the foreign policy himself.
David, one question. In terms of time and were they part of Gush Emunim, the 10,000 Jews that were forcibly removed from Gaza, was that part of Gush Emunim?
No. Okay, that's a great question. I sort of skipped over. Did you want to add something to that?
No, I just wanted to know.
Okay,
whether-
so
when
in
it happened. When
2005.
did they get there? And
They were there, I don't know, in the 80s. I think. I didn't look it up. It could be the 90s, but something like that. The 80s or 90s. I think 80s. They were Arik Sharon, who you may remember as the general that recouped and won the Yom Kippur War in the Sinai. He was prime minister when he determined we no longer should be in Gaza. And this is called the disengagement.
have they been buying the land
No,
legitimately?
they may, I don't know how they acquired, first of all, there weren't very many. I mean, Gaza is a small place, but these were 5 kibbutzim, if I'm remembering right, in the northern part of Gaza. It was relatively small, but under government edict, they were required to leave, and then it was taken apart. And this is still one of the big issues in Israel today, that the right wing has never forgiven this action. So people, if they aren't Gush Emunim, they are the outgrowth of Gush Emunim who think today, literally this minute, right now, that Israel should resettle Gaza and rebuild those kibbutzim. There was a conference about this yesterday in which 10 ministers from the Israeli government attended. I think it was 10, if I'm remembering what the Times of Israel said. Okay, but let's say on Bezalel Smotrich. So he's Minister of Finance, which is a very important ministry, because obviously it's all about the budget. And in Israel, in the United States, any country you want to pick, often it always comes down to the budget, right? Everybody is fighting over the budget. In Israel, if they don't pass a budget, the government falls. So he is inept, only protecting his people, and not funding all sorts of other things that needed to be funded. And he has this kind of power because he's the Minister of Finance. He also is directly involved in the defense ministry, which means he has great influence on what's happening in the West Bank. Add this, this is not our focus, add this to the other Dickens-like name in this coalition, whose name is Itamar Ben-Gvir, who is the Minister of the Police, who, if anything, is more right-wing than Bezalel Smotrich.
You always hear those two names together. I mean,
They always go together. They ran together for the Knesset and then split apart into their separate parties. Okay, so what does he support? He supports expanding settlements. He opposes a Palestinian state. He denies the existence of the Palestinian people. He is against the disengagement from Gaza. When that happened, he was a young man, 2005. That was 20 years ago. He's 44 right now. All right, so he's 24, 25. He was part of a group that planned to blow up the Ayalon Highway. That's the main highway through Tel Aviv. They were caught with 700 liters of gasoline. Now, this is important because he and his pal, Itamar Ben-Gvir, are very opposed to the demonstrations in Tel Aviv every week. In Israel, if you want to prove you are an effective demonstrator, you stop traffic. It's just the way it's done. If you are demonstrating for a higher budget and greater rights for disabled people, you stop traffic. If you are demonstrating for higher wages for nurses, and you stop traffic. If you are demonstrating against the government in Tel Aviv, you stop the traffic on the main highway, the Ayalon, which is what he wanted to blow up and what now he wants to arrest everybody for blocking traffic.
why did you want to blow it up?
In protest to the government's dismantling of the
That would
kibbutzim in
really stop
Gaza.
traffic.
Yeah.
He was a young man. I just want you to understand who he is, who's in this government. I think it is fair to say he is racist. It is absolutely clear, no question, he is homophobic. He opposes gay marriage. He opposes reform conversions to their fake religion.
Oh. Well,
That's a quote. I wrote it down so that, because I knew you would want to hear something like that. He opposes reform conversions and their fake religion. That's the quote. Okay, so do we know who this guy is? Who is representing? He's representing religious Zionism and the move to essentially bring the West Bank into Israel proper. Questions about that introduction? Took half an hour, but so that you have some sense of what we're talking about now, right? We're all on the same page. Okay. I made 18 of these, so I know that this is fun. I'm going to start to pass those down that way. I'm going to start to pass those down that way. Sure. Okay, now we need to talk about this material before there's two things I want to say. One I wanted to say at the beginning and I forgot. We should note that one of the greats, the Gadol Hador, one of the great rabbis of the last generation in America died yesterday. Walter Jacob from Pittsburgh. If you want to know anything about him, you can ask Fran. Fran knows the whole family very well. His father was Simone's rabbi in Springfield when she was growing up. He was the 27th generation of rabbis.
No, he was the 8th generation.
No, he's much more than
maybe
that.
20.
Much more than that.
He was,
His grandfather, Benno Jacob, was a great biblical commentator that people still read to this day. he was 93 when he died, and he really was a significant, he wrote Reform Jewish Responsa. He helped create the Reform Rabbinic Seminary in Germany, Geiger Seminary, that you may have heard about. He was past president of the Central Conference of American Rabbis. Great guy, great scholar, and a great rabbi. And we're diminished now that he's gone. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The other thing is the material. I didn't put together the material we're about to look at. Michal Hartman put together this material for a lecture and a study group that she did at the Hartman Institute last summer, which is where I found it, where I saw it. Michal Hartman is David Hartman's granddaughter, Daniil Hartman's daughter. She's working on a PhD. She runs their high school program, and she is working on a PhD on this subject matter. And so she had gleaned some of it from her PhD work, her research, to give us so that we could see a little bit of the theory that motivates people like Bezalel Smotrich, and some of the theory which grows out of his community, but is of a different sort. So that's what we're going to look at. There are about 12 passages here. They're not hard. They may be hard to understand, but they're not long or difficult in terms of reading. So let's take a look at number 1. So this is from this guy, Moshe Avigdor Amiel, who is actually a pre-state religious thinker from the 1930s. So the idea here is to see what this kind of religious thinking was about even before there was a state. Okay. You see, he's writing in Warsaw in 1934. All wars that Judaism has waged against idolatry have been against their belittlement of our special moral compass embedded within our hearts, the voice of God which resides in every person. Who's their belittlement?
Outsiders.
Non-Jews. Their image of God. Ancient idolatry has taken form in new modern nationalism. Nationalism is based upon the perception of kol alim gvar, which whoever holds power holds justice and integrity as well. The essence of nationalism is the iron fist. This nationalism is not founded on a person's image of God, but rather on the destructive devil found within them, which produces hatred for those who are not part of their ethnic group or citizens of their country. This should sound pretty familiar around here in the United States these days. Secular Zionism is founded on hate of the non-Jews towards Israel, not Jewish hate. Non-Jews hating Jews, Israel. It is not for nothing that secular Zionism emphasizes anti-Semitism in order to support its claims, while our nationalism stems from love of Israel for God and for all who are created in the image of God. So this guy has a very unrealistic image of who the Jewish people is, but let's see what he says. First of all, is he a nationalist? He's not really a nationalist, even though from people like him, ultimately you get the hyper-nationalists in Israel today. But he understands the evil of nationalism. What happens when you're a hyper-nationalist, a super-nationalist? You're about ruling with an iron fist, right? You're about hating those who are not part of your group. You're about hating those who are not citizens of your group. I mean, we obviously saw this in Europe during the Second World War, which he's writing in 1934.
It was an ultranationalist Polish government that he's talking about here. That's
But
what was going on.
what he wants to say, secular Zionism, people like David Ben-Gurion, they're good because they're dealing with anti-Semitism. They understand what's happening out there, that they hate us, that there's anti-Semitism, and so we have to do something in response to it. But he says the problem with it is they're not nationalists like we are nationalists, we Jews. Because we Jews are nationalists in the sense that we only love. We love Israel, and we love God, and we love everyone who's created in the image of God. Is that your experience of Jews?
Does he?
I know some Jews like this.
Does he think non-Jews are created in the image of God or only Jews?
That's a great question. So he doesn't say, so I can't say for certain. My guess is he does think so, but we're going to see that later on, they don't necessarily think so. Okay? And next week, we'll talk about this much more. Okay, who is Eliezer Sadan? He was the head, and this is going to be hard to explain, of the first pre-military academy. Okay, so in Israel, when you turn 18, what happens next? Unless you're ultra-Orthodox.
Okay.
You're supposed to go into the army, right? Okay, but you don't have to. You can do what we here would call a gap year. Sometimes it's even 2 years. You can go to some program which is supposed to help you develop. And the thinking is this is good for the individual and it's also good for the army. If they have people who are at a higher level of education, a higher level of personal development. So these pre-military academies and pre-military programs have opened up all over the country. The Reform movement has one.
So you do that first and then you go into.
Then you go into the army.
So it's a
I have
longer
2 or
commitment.
3 actually.
Well, it just means that you don't go into the army until you're 19 or 20. And these pre-military programs are very different one from the next. But he was one of the first ones to found a pre-military academy in the West Bank. All right. So what does he say? Now this is from 2013. So we're talking about relatively recent. Messiah's job is to promote righteousness and justice, to establish a society built upon charity, mercy, righteousness, and justice. And this society will be a huge wonder that will make the nations want to be like us, because individual righteous and pure people exist among the nations of the world. But a living nation that has the strength to fight different interests and found a national life that is based upon justice and righteousness, this is a great wonder, the dream of all humanity. And thus it says, and many people shall go and say, for out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Thus the state of Israel, in its existence and essence, is the foundation for all of Torah and has in it the utmost holiness and sanctity of God's name in the eyes of all the nations. What do you think about that, Bruce? Look at it carefully. Joel?
Alibi.
Alibi what?
It should only be so.
What it? He
Well,
says several things there. What it?
what if all the nations viewed Israel as being this moral, righteous state, and they should all emulate them, which is certainly contrary to history. No governments want to do that.
You think?
Huh?
I think at one time in the 50s, after the Shoah, this was partially true, that a lot of nations looked upon Israel as a place where you would find righteousness and justice, based on what Jews had gone through.
I was too young in the 50s to actually evaluate that. Meaning I was born in
Light
1950.
unto the Nations. There was a program, a TV program.
Oh yes, The Eternal Light. Do you remember it? It was produced by Jewish Theological Seminary. I used to watch it on Sunday mornings when I didn't go to religious school. I watched it on Sunday morning. It was essentially, it was like little dramas that were along the lines of what Aaron just said. But they were fiction.
I still think in the 50s, there was a better, much greater respect for Israel than there is today.
Okay, so let's look, what did David Ben-Gurion say he wanted Israel to be? Did he want it to be a model for all the other nations? I think he wanted it to be a nation like all the other nations. I think there's a famous quote about it. He said he knew that Israel would succeed when there were prostitutes in Tel Aviv.
Jewish
Jewish prostitute. And, you know, a Jewish prisoner is in prison. He got his wish. Okay, let's break this one down for a second.
Isn't so idealistic.
It is idealistic in a way.
Can I say something?
Yes.
But it seems like a lot of nations, United States, probably most nations, put that out as this is what we are.
I agree with you.
And
It's certainly part of American self-identity.
right, but the truth is that's just the promo part. There's a whole dirty part.
Well, so,
That-
so what is the American, for a second, what is the American self-image? The shining city on the hill.
Right, democratic example for the world.
Right.
Yeah.
Leader of the free world, president, right?
And there's a certain movement that wants to get all the dirty part out of the textbooks and
So
the
we're talking about
libraries
it.
and hide it.
Oh, yeah, we never had slaves. We were perfectly wonderful neighbors to the Native Americans. Yeah, I agree with
Slavery
you.
was beneficial.
All right, but he says here, it's the Messiah's job. He's talking messianic times. The Messiah's job is to promote righteousness and justice, right? We all think that if we actually believe in a personal Messiah, but the notion of the messianic age is precisely this. And so he says, what would be the huge wonder would be in the times of the Messiah where you had a whole nation, a whole country that was dedicated to living that out. That would be the inspiration to the world. And that's why they would all flow. You know, those passages we read when we take the Torah out of the ark, you know, that all the nations, you know, that will take the Torah, the Torah will belong to everyone. They'll all come to the Temple Mount. They'll all worship God as one. We say this in every service, right? That's all messianic. For out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Thus, this is what I want you to pay attention to. The state of Israel in its existence and essence. What is the state of Israel? Is it supposed to be a country like all other countries, but for Jews? Is the foundation of all of the Torah and has in it the utmost holiness and the sanctity of God's name. In other words, what is our goal? Our goal is to be a holy people in a holy land. That sounds good. But I think that when you have that as your goal, it tends to make you think how about everyone else.
Better than that, yes.
Really good.
You're better than everyone
You're
else.
better than everyone else. You're better than everyone else.
Who is this guy, did you say? Who wrote it?
And his name is Sadan, and he, what I have down for him is he's the head of the first pre-military academy.
Oh, right.
So he's a well-known educator from that side, rabbinic educator from that side.
Does the chosenness come into it at all?
I think he says yes. That's what I think he's defining chosenness here. He's defining chosenness, and chosenness is a double-edged sword from my point of view. When you think you are chosen, that means somebody else is not chosen.
The basis of anti-Semitism, isn't it?
The basis of any kind of hatred. We've experienced it as anti-Semitism, and I'm a little scared to say that we're in the United States, we're experiencing that again. But I'm sure any group could tell you this from their point of view. Right.
But if we're not chosen, what are we?
Well, that's the conundrum, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
What is the meaning of chosen? So the move that I sort of like, which I doubt that you would like, but I sort of like it, is liberal Jews have often said, rather than saying we're the chosen people, we prefer to say we're the choosing people. Meaning we turn it into an active verb instead of a past participle. We're not chosen by God as much as we are choosing God. In other words, this is our aspiration to move in this direction. That's a little different. Say it's substantially different. And of course, the text never uses the present participle. The text always uses the past participle, but it's a move that you can make. All right, let's look at 3. This guy, Eliezer Melamed. He's also an educator. He has a specialty. He's known to be a great halakhist. Sigula, Am Yisrael. What is Sigula? We are supposed to be an Am Sigula.
People love.
It's usually translated as a treasured nation. That the goal, the meaning of chosenness, is to be a treasured nation. The problem today, when the value of the individual and equity are the basis of our moral positions, is that it is difficult to speak about ourselves as the treasured people. For all the nations of the world are supposedly also treasured people. Especially after the Holocaust, when the entire world learned how dangerous the value of nationalism could be, how can we claim that we are the treasured people, and further claim that because of this status, we have the sole rights over our land? This question is not a theoretical one for me. Many times I lie awake at night because of these thoughts. Here, I, living in Israel, think that my people are the treasured people, while in another location, a Frenchman resides and similarly believes himself, and in yet another place, an Arab or a Japanese or a Chinese person lives, and he too similarly perceives himself as uniquely treasured. In addition, the faithful of all religions are certain that their religion is the true religion. So how can I, with all honesty, posit that specifically our people are the Am Hasigula, and that our religion is the true religion? Of course, I knew the essential justification for this, which is based on divine revelation. Yet I was still troubled mainly by the moral question, until my mind was settled by the argument that the nation that desires beyond any other nation to bring good to all people and all nations alone is justified in claiming to be the Am Segula. This is the unique identity of the Jewish people. So it was this wonderful passage to the last sentence.
Yeah.
He's sort of, if I'm remembering right, I think he's one of the rabbis in the Gush. And he sort of has a more liberal perspective. But what is he saying here? He's saying, look, what we just said. If you're Irish, you probably thought of the British, in terms, or if you are Chinese, you probably thought the Japanese in a certain way. In other words, everybody thinks this about themselves, that they are special and that they have been put upon by somebody else who isn't special. So he then asks the right question. What gives me the right to say we're an Am Segula, that we're the treasured people, the treasured people? And his answer is, we want it more than everybody else. What a chutzpahdik thing to say.
Yeah, that they think they want it more. I mean, I'm sure they do think they want it more.
I mean, it doesn't make any logical sense, but
You had to find a way to get there.
he had a pre-commitment that we're the Am Segula, but he intellectually understands there's a problem in this.
At least he's honest enough to say there's a problem.
All right, so you know that I'm thinking of that Mordechai Kaplan, the intellectual founder of the Reconstructionist movement, he went through the same process, just without the last sentence, which is why he changed the blessing before the Torah. The blessing before the Torah, Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim, who has chosen us from all the nations. He said, and he took it out. He changed the blessing. It failed. Apart from a handful of Reconstructionist congregations around the country, everybody still says the traditional one, because I think it fits the music.
But we kept the words, but we changed the translation.
Yeah, I know, that's a little tricky thing that the Reform movement does.
Exactly.
Yeah, we keep the Hebrew and then we play around with the English, like nobody will know.
Beloved is an extreme.
Yeah.
But by the way,
He's not
just talking about obstacle law is one thing, but he doesn't link with it. The other part of that is the kingdom of priests. Now, those things have to go together or they fall apart.
Well, so I think we're going to see a little bit of that later on, but they're all pieces of the same idea. That we're a treasured nation, we're supposed to be holy, we're supposed to be, kingdom of priests is another way of saying we're supposed to be holy, that we're all on that level of purity. And they're trying to justify it as the holy people in the Holy Land. Okay, let's turn the page. Tzvi Yisrael Tao. Ultra-Orthodox Zionist. We must increase the appearance of the national life and develop it to glorify in our work the revelation of the divine light. Israeli life, cultural development, uplifting the nation, and economic, scientific, and collective prosperity all increase the spreading of holiness in the world and enhance the impact of the nation's life on all of humanity. The more we live our normal life, the more uplifted the entire world becomes because of us. From the fact that we are connected with a life connection to all of humanity as the heart of the organs. Now, how does he see the Jewish people?
Central to everybody else.
To everybody else. We're the salvation of the world.
Spreading holiness.
Now, is that really different than much of the teachings in the Reform movement? That we are supposed to be an Or LaGoyim, a light to the nations? Isn't that what we teach? That somehow we have a responsibility to uplift the nation, the rest of the nation. But here,
That's why we never talk about Jewish criminals. You know? You never, ever talk about somebody who's a crook.
Ivan Boesky,
You don't talk about that.
Bernie Madoff. See, now that really is from a Dickens novel. That Bernie made off with all the money? Right? Bugsy Siegel?
The only acknowledged Nobel laureates.
Yeah, but okay. What is his point here? Why is he saying this?
But I think the difference between what he says and what the Reform movement says is that we say that we have an obligation to try to do this, and he's saying that the world is uplifted because of us.
Mhm.
I mean, that's the chutzpah in it.
Yeah, because for him, it's theological in a way that it's only sort of theological for us.
Right.
But these are the people who form people like Smotrich. And it goes on because we're going to see is, so Eliezer Melamed, who I'm pretty sure is a much more reasonable kind of thinker. The great vision of the nation of Israel in its land, and that the land of Israel will be inhabited by the nation of Israel, and the temple will stand tall on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, and all the national institutions will be governed in accordance with the ways of the Torah, in morality and holiness, and Israel will be a light to the nations, that they will come to visit the land and receive inspiration to repair the nations of the world. In order to fulfill this vision, this is where he loses me, the entire land must be settled by the nation of Israel. And only non-Jews who desire to be part of Israel's great vision can join the nation of Israel in the status of resident alien. Ger Toshav is the Hebrew for that. So what is he saying? What is Israel's role? His role is we have a universal impact. But only if you have Jews, really what he wants to say is Jews alone, living in the Jewish land. Now, if you have a few hangers-on who want to be along for the ride with you, they can be resident aliens.
They have to completely accept all of this.
All of this. The whole thing.
And he's a theocrat.
Right. Absolutely.
He's a theocrat.
This is theocratic politics. This is what people are saying. There is a whole community in the state of Israel that thinks this way. There's a whole community in the United States, Jewish community, mostly in the ultra-Orthodox, that more or less thinks this way too. not necessarily about the state of Israel, but about the Jewish people and God. Okay, let's look at two voices of religious Zion. Amital is here. You look him up with the Amital communication. Yeah, he's the head of a yeshiva in the Gush. Michael Blinsky studied it.
And yeah, there's also people at Berdesio study.
1999. These generations do not ask themselves, how beyond the law of return and the absorption of immigrants must Jewish political independence and sovereignty be expressed? 50 years after the establishment of the state, we thank God for what God has done for us. However, after 50 years, we have a responsibility to listen to the penetrating questions that we should be asking ourselves. Do we truly see the dominion of justice and truth as the purpose of everything? Is the state of Israel the realization of the dominion of justice and truth? Have we even reached that which the more enlightened of the nations of the world have achieved? Let us speak in more concrete terms. Do we have a truly egalitarian society? Is everyone equal, or are some people more equal? Is opportunity in business, government, and education indeed available to all, or perhaps only to those who are closer, for whatever reason, to the pie? Does the concern for the weak, the ill, the downtrodden, the poor, the unfortunate truly match Jewish standards? Are we narrowing the gap between those in different income brackets, or are we widening them? These claims confront every one of us, religious and non-religious, for the basic principle of justice and morality are accepted by all. We must stress something else. There is a revolutionary historical change here, which we have not yet begun to digest. For 2 millennia, we were the victim, the oppressed, the ruled, and suddenly we have changed from being the victim to being the ruler. Now, as we come to deal with those over whom we rule, even if they are hostile to us, it is incumbent upon us to apply practically all the lofty concepts of morality and humanity that we developed when we were ruled over by others. Do we stand this test as we hope to? 1999. This is before the separation from Gaza, all this kind of stuff. And he delivers this as a sermon on Independence Day. So this guy is a rabbi remember I told you about Gush Etzion, which was Jewish and then lost and then retake. That's where he lives. So he's not really part of the settler movement in the same way that these other guys are. And what is he saying here? I think any one of us at this table could say this. Yeah. Are we living up to our highest ideals as Jews?
He founded Meimad.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
And he's put the bar pretty high. He's not pulling any punches. But what he is saying is Israel is justified if it tries to live up to its highest ideals. I think we say the same thing about America. That we feel justified. Look, we know all the things that are wrong about America, but we feel justified as Americans that this country is worthwhile when we are trying, not necessarily succeeding, but trying to live up to our highest ideals. So she included this so that you see not everybody is a crazy.
No, this is good.
Okay. However, the remaining couple are not so good.
No,
I can tell you that there are people in the streets every week who are trying to send that message in their own way. What they are specifically sending the message about is the redeeming of the hostages. But the argument is, this is our highest value. Jewish tradition teaches us, Pidyon Shvuim, the redemption of the captive, is the highest value. You sell a Torah scroll to redeem a captive.
Oh.
So they are saying we have to live up to our highest Jewish value. Now, is there politics also? Of course there are politics also, but that's the argument. Joel, you wanted to say something?
Well, yeah, I had probably, so let's take it to the absurd. Are we to pay $10 billion for each hostage? Or,
Who are you asking?
well, I'm asking you.
My answer would be yes.
Yes.
Okay, so as I understand it from what I've been taught is that, yes, our highest value is redeeming the hostage, but the redemption requirement goes to the value of that hostage.
There
It
is,
doesn't go ad infinitum forever.
so there,
There's 2 points.
there are, first of all, there's not a single opinion.
No, I've never.
We are talking about Jews, right? Even 2 Jews have 3 opinions, right? So there's not a single opinion. I was responding specifically to what Richard asked in terms of, is there this kind of argument? That's what I interpreted your question to be. Okay, so in terms, when Netanyahu, I want to make your argument for you. Earlier, 2011, Netanyahu was prime minister. There was a hostage in Gaza, his name was Gilad Shalit. Netanyahu agreed and approved and took credit for giving up 1,000 security prisoners to get Gilad Shalit back. One of them was Sinwar. That was based, he would have said, on Jewish value. In reality, it was based on the politics of the time, in my view. But Israel in general, there were some people that were opposed, but Israelis in general supported that move. Now that's not $10 billion, but in Israeli terms, 1,000 security prisoners for one soldier almost falls into the same kind of category.
But you can extend that. What about to get the hostage back? We leave Israel. You pick up and you
No,
leave.
you're absolutely, there clearly are limits. There clearly are limits.
So the question is
Where do you put the limit? Where do you put the limit? And so I think, this is now just my opinion, that if Israelis believe that negotiations were based on that there's a limit, but we're seriously negotiating to get them back, they would be satisfied with it. The reason Israelis are demonstrating is they believe that that's a sham, that this government does not want to seriously negotiate.
I would say that the limit would be if the freeing hostage would cost somebody else's life, would cost a life for it.
Well, so that was the debate about the 1,000 to 1, when one of them is Sinwar. Right? But he was not the only one. It just happens that his name is well known now, and he rose to the top. But most of them were in his category. And the determination was, in order to get one person back who is actually alive, we'll live with the risk. In other words, they said, we have a risk, we have a potential, and we have a reality. And we'll take the reality, even if it means living with this gigantic risk. I think, and I can't prove this to you, I think most Israelis think that way. And the reason, they have practical reasons. It's not because they're sitting there and they studied in yeshiva about Pidyon Shvuim and they said, this is the highest value, we have to do it. Some of them would say, what they're really thinking is, it may be your kid, but he might as well be my kid. I talked about this last time. And so they're looking at it from the point of view is, Israel only lives if it has an army. Then the next line is, Israel only has an army if it has morale. Israel only has morale if the soldiers believe that they don't leave anyone behind. It's a strictly practical, there's a whole practical kind of argument here that, I mean, you took it to the absurd in terms of ending the country, but why would they trade 1,000 to 1? Because from their perspective, it was a necessary deal in order to maintain the army, which must be maintained. Does that Does that make some sense as opposed to just looking at it in the narrow transaction? Looking at it in the larger transaction of what does it take? What happens when the army believes that they might be left behind?
Wow, good.
Well, so that's morale, but also everybody knows everybody's kid. These are all everybody's kids. It's this tiny country. Okay, let's look at.
This guy again.
I think so. Yes. All those who hold the laws of Moses have forgotten that we do not only have the laws of Moses, but rather we have the laws of Moses in Israel. If you were married in a Jewish ceremony, you remember what you said? If you were male. And if it was a ceremony that I did, if you were male or female. Although I had to change the gender of the words to make the grammar work. Hare at mikudeshet li batava adzo kedat Moshe veYisrael. Behold, you are consecrated to me according to the religion, literally, the Torah of Moses and Israel. So he's going to make a lot out of that. In other words, if all other religions have two parts, mitzvot between an individual and God and mitzvot between an individual and their fellows, that's the classic distinction in mitzvot. Classically, you would be taught, these are mitzvot between you and God, like praying 3 times a day. And these are mitzvot between you and other humans, like the ethical ones. Here, we have a third category. And this last category may be the most important, and it is the mitzvot between Israelite and the nation. This is new stuff, not in the tradition. We have commandments between you and God, and we have commandments between fellow human beings, but now he's saying there is a special third category of commandments. Be clear, commandments that have to do with an individual Jew and the Jewish people.
Where are the commandments written? What are
They
they?
aren't. But he's going to tell you. Well, they're going to tell you. Do we see that? I'm sorry?
He's gonna write them.
Exactly right.
No, they do.
No, that's exactly right. What they're doing now, I would argue, this is why I wanted you to see this. This is radical. Radical in terms of its interpretation of Judaism and its application, which we'll see. Let's look at the next one, Tal. The awakening of this national consciousness is the inherent difference between exile and redemption. We point to this and say, this is a sign that the spirit of redemption is beginning to shine, that redemption is beginning. My people Israel, for their return is near. Not as individual people settling the land of Israel, but as a nation that is being resurrected. A national spirit fills the hearts of many, and everyone has one request in their heart: to sacrifice their lives for the establishment of the nation. To live in the land of Israel when it is in our hands and control, to live in the state of Israel. Did you follow this movement?
What's the date?
I don't have a date. I'm sorry. Let's see, what is this, number 8? No, I don't have a date. She didn't give it to us and I didn't.
Goes against the first paragraph of nationalism as the worst sin.
Right. Oh, well, that was a different guy.
Yeah, I understand that.
But look at what Tao did building on Amiel. So Amiel says there's a third category of mitzvah between a Jew and the Jewish people. Now, Tao wants to say they're the most important. Look at what it says. A national spirit fills the hearts of many, and everyone has one request in their heart. One request in their heart: to sacrifice their lives for the establishment of the nation. And then to live in the land of Israel. And then to live in the state of Israel. Did you notice the equation there? That the land of Israel and the state of Israel, and the highest mitzvah is to die for it. Now, where have you ever heard that in Judaism? What's the big thing that we're all taught? Come on, you know it. You know, it's called pikuach nefesh. What's pikuach nefesh? The saving of a soul, right? That all the mitzvot are out if it means saving a life, because in Judaism, we care about life, chai b'hem, right? That we're supposed to live by the commandments, not die by them. And what does this say? To sacrifice their lives for the establishment.
And that's what this work was about, so you can see.
He was born in
Reality,
38.
now that we have a state of Israel.
Well, but he is saying,
You know stuff.
if you're going to put
Oh,
a,
Wikipedia.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you
He
said.
was born in 38, so I would assume this is post-state.
Oh, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
This was in 38.
No,
No,
he was
he
born
was
in
born
It
38.
could only be
38.
7
So-
years old.
It's a wonderful thing of cell phones, and I don't have to tell you information, because anybody, you can look up all these people on your own if you want. But what I'm getting at here is you have tradition, mitzvot with God, mitzvot between human being to human being, and now you have mitzvot between a Jew and the Jewish people, and we're supposed to die for the Jewish people. We're supposed to die for the land of Israel. We're supposed to die for the state of Israel. Now, if you want the silver lining in this thinking, virtually all of the national religious sign up for the army.
I was just gonna ask about that, if they would have gone.
Think about it.
Oh, no,
They are, not only that, they die. I mean, they are signed up for the army, they are signed up for the combat units, they are very brave, very serious soldiers.
Another question. If that is so, do the ultra-Orthodox and the Orthodox do that?
No. The ultra-Orthodox do not do that. We're not talking about the ultra-Orthodox, we're talking about the religious Zionist Orthodox. Okay, so it's very specific. That's why I started with the introduction. We're talking about the people from Gush Emunim into the West Bank, the settlers, those people, not the ultra-Orthodox, not the black hats, for lack of a better term. There are other words that sometimes I use that regarding them, they think, not the West Bank, not the land of Israel. The highest thing is the yeshiva. Never leave the yeshiva. God forbid you're out of the yeshiva. All right, so that's a different group. You can't lump all Orthodox together. And I'm not talking about modern Orthodox. I'm not talking about ordinary Orthodox. Here, what he is saying is, as religious Zionists, settling, creating the state of Israel, the land of Israel, is the highest mitzvah. You die for it. More important than pikuach nefesh. Very radical. Okay, one that's not so radical. Have you heard of Ovadia Yosef? Ovadia Yosef was the chief Sephardi rabbi. He has started a dynasty. His son ultimately became the chief Sephardi rabbi, and now his grandson was just elected as the chief Sephardi rabbi. He was very radical on some things and not on others. So I wanted to give you a little breather. She wanted to give you a breather. What does he say? If the heads of the army and the state decide that there is a threat to pikuach nefesh, that if the territories from the land of Israel are not returned, there is a risk of immediate war with the Arab neighbors, and both will be eaten by the sword, God forbid, and if the territories are returned, the risk of war will be avoided, and there is a chance for true and existing peace. All agree, I should have underlined this, all agree that the territories from the land of Israel must be returned in order to achieve that goal. Pretty amazing, don't you think? Too bad he's dead. For there is nothing that stands before pikuach nefesh. And just as if there is a dispute between the doctors whether the patient is in danger, if they fast on Yom Kippur, he is to eat. Right? In other words, if doctors, one says yes, one says no, he eats. Because on issues of life and death, we are lenient. Even if there is a doubt, that is the ruling here. If there is a dispute, and some of the experts say that there isn't an issue of risk at all, and others say that the territory is not returned, there is an immediate risk of war, and pikuach nefesh, on issues of life and death, we are lenient, even if there is doubt, and we must return the territories so as to prevent the risk and danger of war. Yeah, this guy, I can tell you, I've been to his grave. It was part of a trip. I certainly didn't plan to go there. But we saw his grave. And still to this day, it's surrounded by mourners and pilgrims, and it's covered in rocks and yahrzeit candles. It's like going to Schindler's grave in Jerusalem.
The question is, I've seen that in Morocco also.
Oh, yeah.
Go there.
Yeah.
On what is this based?
Superstition, but or veneration. Let's be fair. But he understood most of what Ovadia Yosef had to say and teach. I did not agree with, but he understood that the highest mitzvah is pikuach nefesh. Now, even with pikuach nefesh, there are limits, as Joe would like to point out correctly, right? So for sexual impropriety or to murder another person, or what's the third one? Idolatry, you have to die rather than pikuach nefesh does not trump those three, pun intended. However, the limits are pretty small. Pikuach nefesh is at the top. And what he is saying is, when it's at the top, it's more important in the land of Israel. Lives of Israelites, Jewish lives, are more important than another acre of territory.
But hasn't trading land for peace not really worked very well for us?
Egypt worked.
That's correct. In terms of the Sinai, that worked, right? 45 years of peace against all the odds, given everything that's happened. That's work. Did the Oslo Accords work?
Did Gaza work?
So the Oslo Accords.
Did the Temple Mount work?
Well, the Temple Mount was never given back.
I thought that what's the thing gave it back in the '67 war.
No.
Moshe Dayan.
He didn't give it back. He left control of the Temple Mount to the Jordanian Arabs that were controlling, but it was never given back. In terms of Gaza, which is a perfect example for your point, it did not work. If you want to look at it in terms of the continuing fighting since Hamas took over in 2006. On the other hand, to have stayed in Gaza also would have meant the continual death of soldiers and all sorts of problems, which is why Sharon did what he did. It wasn't altruistic. He was making a practical decision. So it's hard to know exactly what would have been worse.
No, I understand, but isn't from the Arab mind that all of Israel is part of land for peace?
Okay, so that's certainly Hamas's position. That's why there's no bargaining with Hamas over that. It's probably Hezbollah's position. However, it's hard to know what might have happened if other voices in the Palestinian community had been cultivated as opposed to suppressed, which the Israeli government did. Netanyahu has been prime minister for 15 years. He understood Hamas to be an asset. Those are his words, not mine. And that the Palestinian Authority, what once was the PLO, that then became the PA, was a problem. He did not want a Palestinian state on his border, and so he suppressed what was going on in the territories and helped with money, primarily the transfer of money, Hamas in Gaza, because he saw them as an asset. What I don't know is what I don't know. We don't know what would have happened with different leadership and with different policies. I know that there are Palestinians that would be willing to deal.
Let me ask you this. You laid out pretty well the right-wing view of Greater Israel. What is the left-wing view of what Israel should be?
Okay, I'm tempted to say that's another class for another time, but I will answer. It really is another class for another time because it's a whole thing. There is a big problem with the left in Israel. So once upon a time, we all know that the left was dominant, right? David Ben-Gurion, Labor Party, which had various names at different times, whether it was Mapai or Labor or different, but it was the left, with small s socialist left. Okay. Those ideas, I believe, were destroyed by the Second Intifada. So those ideas had major influence through the Oslo Accords. People like Shimon Peres and I can't remember the other guy's name from Merit, so I'm always forgetting David. I'm forgetting his name. But they had major influence, and essentially the idea was, we'll take a risk for peace. When it went bad, and you have the first Intifada in the late 80s, and then really the second Intifada in 2001, thereabouts, the credibility of the left was destroyed. And what you only have left in Israel to this day is the right and the center. And the center is either center right or center left. But the real left, that same kind of solid, based on kind of socialist ideas to the left, I don't even think the Labor Party falls into it anymore. The Labor Party in the last few months has merged with Meretz, which was the far left party, to run together. But I don't think that they're far left anymore. What they are is they're all about social issues. But for Israelis, I think, look, I'm making it up. I think most Israelis said, we saw what happens when we tried that road. And so they're wary. They're not in favor of it. I mean, a Palestinian state right now in the West Bank, with the border all through the population centers of Israel. Israelis say, no thanks. We're not willing to take that big a risk until we see something that encourages us to do it. Which is why, I want to believe that someday there will be a solution, but it requires spade work now to get to the point where something can happen later. And I can't tell you that all that's going to happen. But your answer to your question is pretty simple. There really isn't a left in Israel.
Well, whatever passes for the left in Israel, then what do they see as the borders of Israel? What is it supposed to be? If we give everything away that the Arabs want, what's left for us?
So I don't think anybody would put it the way you just put it. So what they would say, I think what makes the left would be, we have aspirations of someday living in peace with our neighbors. As opposed to, we will never be able to trust them. And so we can't. That would be the right. And so what makes me left is I have those aspirations. And what that would mean would be a two-state solution. Now, exactly where is the border going to be? I don't actually think that's so hard. I don't think that's so hard. What's hard is the trust and making it, and the trust being reasonable. I think that Ehud Barak was pretty close in terms of what was offered in 2000 at the end of Bill Clinton's tenure. But Arafat walked away. He didn't make even a counter offer. He just walked away. And so we'll never actually know. But I think that those details can be worked out, even from a security point of view, but not from a trust point of view. So what Israel needs, I'm fond of the joke, is it needs to be Scandinavia. We're not going to get that. But what about the relationship between Holland, Belgium, and Luxembourg? They function as a single market. They're all politically separate entities. They all have their own legislatures, they write their own laws, but they're not afraid of each other. Right? All sorts of things can happen once. I mean, there was nothing but hatred between the British and the French. But eventually, they got over that. And then new possibilities were there. I'm hopeful that that's what's happening in Ireland, right? Between the Irish and the British and Northern Ireland. So, yeah, we're watching that now. It takes time and it's difficult, but the real issue is whether you have an aspiration and whether you're willing to work responsibly, not foolhardily, but work towards building the trust. Why did Israel trust Egypt? It didn't really. It was willing to give back the land, but the border was fortified. I mean, there was an army there. I mean, but ultimately now, there is a kind of trust between Israel and Egypt. And there is a kind of trust between Israel and Jordan.
So clearly part of the Palestinian state would have to be the entire West Bank.
No, what?
The Arabs won't accept anything less, will they?
How do you know that?
I don't know that. I'm just making a guess from what I've heard them say.
Right, with the most radical elements of it. Just like if the Arabs want to, all they have to do is point to this stuff and say, the Jews don't want peace. They don't want to deal with us. Here, let me read you a few rabbis. Right? That's the whole point here. They only want a maximal state. They only want to get rid of us. And I'm going to say a couple things that are probably pretty harsh. One of which is these people want an all-out war in the Middle East. Because they believe only in an all-out war will they be able to expel all the Arabs. Not the Arabs in the West Bank.
Yes,
All the
Israel.
Arabs. The Arabs in Israel too. Hamas wanted an all-out war. Sinwar wanted an all-out war in the Middle East. Iran, Iraq, everybody. Why? Because he thought only in an all-out war with everybody involved would he be able to expel the Jews. They're two sides of the identical coin. And if you're going to let the radicals from each side speak, what we like to do is talk about our reasonable people and their radicals. And what they want to do is talk about their reasonable people and our radicals. Does that make sense? So for me, the issue is building up the trust. Okay,
The radicals are in power.
Well, that's
On both sides.
on both sides. On both sides. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Aaron's got it exactly right. And that's, by the way, what scares me here. So let's look at Sudan again. In these two mitzvot, saving Israel from the hands of its enemies and settling the land. You notice what he puts as the two mitzvot that guide everything. Save Israel from the enemy and settling the land. There is something special, different from all the other mitzvot in the Torah. When it comes to all the mitzvot in the Torah, it is written, and you shall live by them and not die by them. From here, we learn that proud self-preservation takes precedence over all other mitzvot. When it comes to the positive mitzvot, there are no mitzvot to take precedence over self-preservation apart from these mitzvot, saving Israel from the hands of its enemy and the mitzvah to settle the land, that for both a person has an obligation to sacrifice their life for them. Rabbi Cook explained that since this is a general collective mitzvah, and the collective cannot die, it does not contradict the rule that you should live by them. But rather, in order for the general mitzvah to be fulfilled, the individual is commanded to risk their life for it. These are the only mitzvot for which a person is commanded to sacrifice his life, to settle the land. These people have elevated a mitzvah that didn't exist, that they created, into the mitzvah. The one that you die for. Eliezer Melamed. If so, retreating from the land of Israel is the most severe desecration of God's name, for it is done by the collective, and the sin of the collective, Sibur, done for all the nations to see, is incomparable to the sin of the individual, and especially when pertaining to a famous mitzvah such as settling the land. For any non-Jew who has read the Bible knows that God promised the land of Israel to his people. And when they see that Jews are willing to give up territories from the land and to estrange themselves from God's promise, there is no greater desecration of God. And so as to prevent this desecration, we must be ready to fight with self-sacrifice to protect the land and make sure not to give up any part of our holy land that God, the creator of heaven and earth, inherited to us. This is their thinking. This is Smotrich's thinking. He's the Minister of Finance. He's financing these people as opposed to regular schools and hospitals. Malamed. Some Torah students do not pay attention to the tremendous commandment fulfilled by soldiers. This is just for you, Felix. They mistakenly think that Torah is separate from Israeli nationalism, as if the Haredim uphold Torah values and commandments while soldiers uphold national values not found in the Torah. However, the truth is that enlisting in the army is one of the most important and fundamental commandments of the Torah, encompassing two commandments upon which everything stands: saving the life of the nation, I'd like to see where that's written, and settling the land of Israel. More accurately, the categorization is as follows. Some observe more of the private commandments, some observe more of the general commandments, and some are privileged to fulfill the commandments of the Torah. What is he saying to the Haredim here? You got it wrong. The big commandment is defending the people in the land, not sitting in your stupid yeshiva. That's what he's saying. The national religion want to require the ultra-Orthodox to be drafted. They want them to be drafted just like everybody else.
Wasn't there some kind of recent ruling on that?
Yeah, the Supreme Court said, yeah, they have to be drafted.
Happened yet?
Of course not.
All of 100.
Think about it for a second. And let's try to be fair about this. It's hard for me, but I'll try. The Supreme Court said the exemption law expired for the ultra-Orthodox. So therefore, since there's no new exemption law, you have to draft them. If you don't draft them, that's illegal. Now, let's say you're the government. And let's say it's not this government. This government does not want to draft them because they don't want to force the ultra-Orthodox out of the coalition, which would cause the government to fall. But let's say that you wanted to draft. Are you going to go into the yeshivas and forcibly take them out and put them into uniforms? How much good is that going to do? I mean, seriously, how do you force them into the army? My guess is if you stationed them all along the Lebanese border, they'd start to form little minions and die. Just like in an LL plane. So the real issue is, how do you accomplish this? My opinion on it is you have to stop funding the yeshivas. Not force them, and you stop funding the yeshivas. And you make it clear to the heads of the yeshivas that they're not getting their money until the appropriate number of students are drafted. Israel, I've read different estimates. Let's say Israel needs 20 to 30,000 soldiers right now. So let's think about this for a second. Israel's army is based on a relatively small standing army. Those are the 18 to 20-year-olds. And then a very big, by Israel standards, reserve army. These people in the reserves have essentially been in the army for the last year. Now, they've been up and down, but mostly up into the army.
The reserves are up to what age? Is there an age?
I think it's now 40.
No, they raised it to 48.
And did they raise it again? It used to be 50. Once upon a time it was 50, and then they lowered it, it was 45. And the idea though is these are people with families, kids, jobs, that you suck out tens of thousands of people out of the economy, out of their homes, out of their businesses, and you have them in the reserves and you have them up for 3 or 4 or 5 months, and then you send them home for a few weeks, then you call them up again. While there are 65,000 ultra-Orthodox who have not been drafted. Okay, so it's no longer an issue of equity. Israel actually needs the bodies, needs them in the army. So there's a real question as to how to do it. And I think that the only answer to that is you have to hit them where it hurts them to make them look at it differently. And that's the funding of the yeshivot. So you have a religious Zionist settler who's has big influence on the purse string. He wants those ultra-Orthodox drafted. They're refusing to be drafted. What happens?
Among another thing, you require them to spend some portion of the day studying regular knowledge instead of only the Torah.
So that's a whole nother issue. Whole nother issue as to what they learn in their schools or don't learn in their schools. Another whole issue. But here, what did Netanyahu do in the last 2 weeks, right? We met 2 weeks ago. What happened right before that? I mentioned it last time. This guy, Gideon Sa'ar, who has 4 seats, left the opposition and rejoined the government. He's a minister without portfolio. But apparently, in order to get this position, he has agreed to support Netanyahu in creating a new exemption law for the ultra-Orthodox. So he doesn't really need Smotrich to pass that law. And the speculation is anytime now, we could read about it today, that they're going to pass that law, which will extend the exemption for the ultra-Orthodox, all this so that Netanyahu can keep his coalition together. Now, is Smotrich going to leave the coalition over this? No, because he's never going to have this kind of influence again. Is Ben Gvir going to lead the coalition over this? No, because he's got influence over the police and all sorts of other things that he's never going to get again. And so Netanyahu is playing this game of keeping enough people happy over whatever the minimum is to need to be happy in order to keep the coalition alive. Okay. And it's very frustrating. It is very frustrating. But what I wanted you to see by looking at this is it's not just that these are crazy people. These are people who I don't agree with, except for what Yosef said and that Israel Independence Day speech. I don't agree with anything that's in here, but they have developed a whole intellectual understanding of who they are and why they are doing what they're doing. If the most important thing is to defend the people on the land, you'll do almost anything to make that happen. And that's what we see going on. That's what's motivating these people. That's what they think. That's what they believe. They're very dangerous, in my view. They are very, very dangerous. The ultra-Orthodox are dangerous in a different way, because the ultra-Orthodox are maybe 15 or 16% of the Israeli population, and that number is growing. And essentially, I'll put it this way, they are drawing out of the society far more than they are putting into it. From their point of view, they are contributing by studying Torah all day. That's what God wants, and that's why the country continues to exist. So they're kind of like God's soldiers in the yeshiva. Look at his face. So for me, that's the look on my face too. I think that that's ridiculous, and so they are dangerous in a different sort of way. But these people are dangerous because of actually what they believe and what they're doing.
Is a Haredi actually acknowledge the existence of the current state of Israel
Depends on what.
until the third temple is built?
No, it
That
depends.
it's not a legitimate state?
No, I think you're a little out of date here. So what you're thinking about is originally, they didn't really acknowledge the state of Israel. That's why ultra-Orthodox were never ministers of any part of the government, because they couldn't acknowledge that they were really part of the Zionist government. They used to be assistant ministers, actually running everything. Okay, however, now they are ministers. It's, we have several generations now that have been born and raised in Israel. And so they've sort of modified that. Now they're trying to make arguments that we're a different kind of Zion. They speak Hebrew, for example. It's rare that you find, some of them still speak Yiddish, but they all also speak Hebrew. That used to be a big deal around the founding of the state. Were they going to speak Yiddish or Hebrew? A lot of that is kind of developed. So it's not so much now that they're overtly anti-Zionist the way they were, although there are some fringe groups like that. The Natsuri Karta and a couple of others, they refuse to take any money from the government. They won't support the government. They don't pay taxes, all those kind of people. But they're really a tiny. Most of them simply live on the largesse of the larger society. So that's a danger. But in terms of this, in terms of what we're watching now with the wars, you have a group of people that are absolutely committed to defending all of the land of Israel and the people of Israel, which leads them to enlist, to be good soldiers, to be serious, to be in the most elite combat units, to do all that kind of stuff. But it also means that they're absolutely opposed to any idea like land for peace, any idea like two states for two people, any of those ideas, which puts them at complete odds with the kinds of things that American governments have been promoting with Israeli society. It's a pretty dangerous thing. What I want to do next time is take a look at Hillel. We'll start by looking at Hillel's famous teaching. What is Hillel's famous teaching?
Stand on 1 foot until you, right?
What is hateful to you, do not, right? But so we'll take a look at that. It's the negative enunciation of the golden rule, right? As opposed to do unto others what you have others do unto you. It was what is hateful to you. We'll actually look at it in the Aramaic. It's only about 6 words. And then we'll take a look and see, what does this really mean? And we're going to talk at some length about, one of you, I think Richard, you said this about who is our brother and who isn't. Who are we concerned with? Do we have a concern for all of humanity? Is it only the Jewish people? We will look at those things. These are all difficult discussions. Everything we have been doing here are difficult discussions because that's Jewish life right now. We're confronted with difficult discussions, whether it's in Israel or here. We're all facing difficult discussions that we hope we wouldn't have to face. I think that we all hope we wouldn't have to face. So I think it's good to sort of talk about it in this kind of environment. Okay?
What percentage of Israeli population do you consider the religious right?
That's a great question. What do they usually say? There's 600,000 settlers. Is that what they say? 600,000 settlers? Of course, that includes some neighborhoods of Jerusalem and some that are really just suburbs. They're not settlers like these people on the hilltops. But in a country of 10 million, if you have several 100,000 that fall into this category, you're talking about a few percent. And then you add them to the right wing. Remember, there's plenty of right wing that think this way, but they aren't settlers. Right? They're living in Israel proper. They're part of Likud, or they're part of other more right-wing parties. I mean, you have Avigdor Lieberman. Does that name ring a bell? He's the founder of the Russian, so-called Russian party. He's a settler. He lives outside of Hebron. Okay, but he's completely opposed to this government because he's opposed to Netanyahu and he's opposed to not drafting the ultra-Orthodox. So he fits in with the anti-Netanyahu group. But he's right wing. He would fall, if we were just asking the question you asked, we'd have to put him into that area. I don't know where some of them fall. Gideon Sar, who has joined the government, is the same thing, right wing, originally out of Likud. You could say the same thing about, what's his name? Bennett, all of them who are right wing, but they're opposed to Netanyahu for one reason or another. Okay, so it's a very tricky question. Okay, hope to see everybody next week. Thank you for coming. Hopefully you thought it was
Thank
worth a
you.
couple hours.
Thank you. Very